Welcome to the Freedom Focus series on the Fearless Tips and Talks podcast. We've got something special for you because we are going to interview approximately 10 guests who have found freedom in a particular area of their life. I'm so honored to take you through this chain-breaking series where we dive into specific topics that bombard our daily living. We want to equip and inspire you to walk in freedom from fear and anxiety in a world that feeds it. Hey, fearless friends. I've got Lauren Gaines in the studio today, and she truly is one of my dearest friends. We have walked through the book writing process together, and today we're celebrating because her book is out into the world, Unshakable Kids. I've got a great interview planned for you today. We're in the Freedom Focus series. So today we're really going to focus on freedom from fear of ruining your kids. Lauren, welcome to Fearless Tips and Talks. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much, Christy. I feel like it's always a treat to talk to you. So now that we get to talk about, our books, that's even better.
I know. Well, you have done it. You wrote the book, sister. I mean, it really has been so cool because I was just like a few months ahead of you, and we would just go back and forth and encourage and love and support and pray for one another. Our Marco Polos are just blown up with talking through the book writing process. And I just want to tell you publicly that you have just been an incredible friend to me. I am so thankful for your love and your encouragement. And I hope that we can just turn right back around and just give you that love and encouragement because this is an incredible book. It's a timely book. It's a book that every parent needs to read. And if you're not a parent and you're going to be a parent someday soon, you need to get it in your tool belt because it just beautifully walks you through so many different stages, so many different seasons, so many different things that we as parents need to know and get down deep inside of us. And I'm just so grateful that you did it and you were obedient and you put this book out into the world. Lauren, I want to know, how did you come up with the title Unshakable Kids?
That is such a good question. I have to tell you, no one asked me that until last night. I was speaking to a church in Canada and they asked me the same question during the Q&A. A parent had asked that and I was like, oh, that is so good. I love that question. And so titling is, as you know, Christy, like a bear, but your title came very quickly and easy to you, I think, and I love it. But I was just like reading scriptures and praying through it and journaling and like writing a million titles down. And I went to Matthew 7, and I have it in my notes here because this is actually the Passion Translation, which I don't read very often, but sometimes I like to look at different translations and compare it. And it talks about the wise man who built his house on an unshakable foundation. And when the rains fell and the floods came, with fierce winds beating upon his house, it stood firm because of its strong foundation. And truthfully, I was tired of being shaken in motherhood. I was tired of feeling like my kids came to me with a problem, or my son, when he was younger, dealt with asthma. And so when he was 18 months, he was hospitalized in the ICU for breathing difficulties. He had RSV. And so we had many trips to the emergency room because he was having breathing retractions. And I remember one time driving and being like, I'm done. Like, I'm done feeling flustered by this. I'm done letting this bother me. I want to view this from God's perspective, not what's happening around me. Because like, it's bad what's happening, but God says that he will have his goodness and mercy follow us all the days of our life. And so I just started praying that over my son and over the situation. And honestly, that might've been the last time. I didn't think about that till now, that we went to the emergency room. And so I was like, I am learning this as a parent. What if my kids could learn that strength, that endurance, to look to God when they're facing trouble? Because as this tells us in Matthew 7, like, the rains are going to come. The trouble is going to come. Like, unfortunately, I wish I could tell you that you could parent in a way your kids will never struggle, but that is just not true. They are already facing challenges more than, we've ever had to deal with as kids. And so they don't need to be shaken by that. They don't need to be defeated. They don't need to be worried, afraid, fearful. They can be unshakable because their foundation is in Christ.
Oh, it's so good. And, there might be people wondering too, like, okay, she's an author, she's a speaker, she's, obviously very knowledgeable about scripture, it seems. But what's really cool about you, Lauren, is you've got some very worldly education too. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that education?
Sure. Yeah. So I have a background in school psychology, a master's in school psychology. And so I worked as a school psychologist in the public school system before kids. So a lot of that consisted of counseling, teaching the, kids how to take their thoughts captive. And I remember in grad school learning about cognitive behavioral therapy for the first
Hmm.
time and being like, wow, this is like what the Bible says. I mean, of course, scientists sometimes aren't going to admit that, but it's aligned with what God has written 2000 years ago, which I just thought was fascinating. And so then when I had kids, I wanted to stay home with them, but I was able to teach online and in person at universities. So I taught intro to psych and human development. And really going through human development was so fascinating, just seeing how we develop emotionally, physically, mentally, and applying what I learned as a school psychologist, and especially having kids too. I'm like, wow, I probably would have been a better school psychologist if I had kids of my own, but I had, the knowledge of it and the tools to help kids in counseling sessions. But now I feel like I have an even greater perspective with having three
Mm.
kids of my own.
Yeah. And I always say this too, dealing with fear and anxiety. I always feel a little bit safer and more comfortable when I know somebody has been through the depths of the hell that I've been through with fear and anxiety. And I kind of think that way for you. It's like you not only are you a mother, but you've also got the study behind you. You have really worked hard to kind of craft and perfect this message. So it's like you have a sense of authority on this topic that's just absolutely beautiful. So I love that about you. Okay, so in the intro, right off the bat, this book like pulls you in because you talk about how you're having church with your kids at home. And this is even in your trailer video. It's so cute. But you're like trying to get them to worship, and there's just like pure chaos going on around them. And you wound up losing your cool and you yell at them while you're trying to have church service with them, which I just think, I mean, so many parents can relate to, right? And then it's just this thought that kind of drops in, am I ruining my kids? And I feel like there's a lot of fear and anxiety, especially in our world right now, Lauren, with parents that are like, oh my gosh, like social media, no social media. Do I let them date? Do I not let them date? Do I send them to public school? Do I homeschool them? Like it's like this constant fear of like, am I ruining my kids? So talk to me about that. And how do we get over that fear?
This is such a good question. And I was thinking about this driving, and I hope I don't tear up, but I think it is such a heavy weight we are carrying as parents today. And it is, especially in a world where everything looks beautiful and wonderful on social media, to be vulnerable and be like, I am worried. I'm about my child, so many different scenarios. I'm worried that my child can't make friends easily. Like, are
Mm,
they lonely? Are they sitting by themselves at lunch? Worried maybe that our kids have a diagnosis. As a school psychologist, I worked with a lot of students in special education, and it can feel like I don't want to tell people that my son is on anxiety medicine or
yeah.
that my daughter is depressed right now. It's such a shame. And it's sad that we feel that way, but we
Mm,
feel like if I admit that my child is struggling, then I'm a bad parent. Then I did something wrong. Then I somehow failed them, and this is my fault. And I've been there with like one of my kids was struggling with anxious thoughts, and so much so they couldn't eat breakfast before school. There were tears, losing weight because when you're anxious, sometimes you
yep.
overeat, but sometimes you don't want to eat. And it was like, I was embarrassed to admit and share this, even with close friends. Like it's to be that vulnerable and say like, I'm struggling. My child is struggling. Again, it makes you feel like you're a bad parent. And that is just such a lie from the devil because it is not our fault that our kids sometimes struggle or that they have a diagnosis of ADHD or autism or depression or anxiety. Like, we could be the best parent and those things could still happen. And so I really hope that I didn't want to share a lot of my kids' vulnerabilities in the book, if I'm being honest, because I want to protect their hearts. But I shared a lot of my own vulnerabilities because I've struggled with anxious thoughts before too. And we aren't alone in this. And you're not the only parent who is laid awake at night and worried that you're making every wrong decision and you are somehow going to permanently damage your child. All of us have been there. It's just we don't want to admit it, because then if we admit it, somehow we're admitting that maybe we're doing it wrong. And that feels too personal. That feels too deep to do. And so I love Isaiah, and I'm going to find this in my notes because I don't have it memorized, but Isaiah 8:18, I recently looked up, and I felt like this was such a good thing for parents to be reminded of and to claim when the situation looks dark and we feel like we're making all the wrong mistakes. It says, "Here am I and the children whom God has given me. We
Mm.
are for signs and wonders in Israel." And I feel like, what if we declared that over our family, over our kids? Even Ephesians 2:10, I believe it is, talks about how we were made for good works before the beginning of time. Jesus set apart good works for us to do. Part of that is raising our kids. That is a good work. And so if he's called us to this, he is going to equip us to it. And we won't get it right. We're going to make mistakes where there's going to be things that we wish we could have changed. And like, I wish I could go back and not scream at my kids, but it happened. And so how can I move forward and really taking it to Jesus and letting him remove that shame, that embarrassment, because that's not from God. That is not from God. That is from the enemy who wants to discourage us, who wants to confuse us and tell us, and condemn us, really. God is not a God who does that. And so I feel like this is such a great topic, and I'm so glad you're willing to bring it to your parents, because again, it's something I think we all struggle with, but we don't want it to admit to even our closest friends.
And Lauren, I think I want to add too, I had the honor of walking alongside of you when your daughter was dealing with that, and you were vulnerable with someone you trusted. And you talked to me about that, but you also talked to me about what you were doing in those moments. And I just looked up to you in those moments because I was like, man, she is hitting this head on. And she's not just, she's practicing what she's preaching. Like the things that she's putting out into the world, she's doing in her home as well. And so I guess I just want to encourage the listeners or the viewers that are watching right now to really find someone that they can confide in, someone that they can talk to. And I wasn't really offering any advice other than encouragement and support and telling you, like, keep going, girl, you're doing this. Like you're gonna, and you guys are on the other side of that. You're on the other
Yes.
side of that. And I believe she's doing well now, isn't she?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really, I think too, sometimes we don't take things right away. We're embarrassed, we're ashamed, and so we kind of just like wait and are frozen because we don't want to admit it, what's really happening. But I like recognize the signs, thankfully, because I knew them, and I was like, no, we are dealing with this head on. I'm
That's right.
not letting this go any farther. And had meetings with the school counselors,
Yeah.
all of that, and now like none of that is needed, because, and I'm not going to say that there will never be an anxious thought that comes to her head. And even for us as parents, like the anxious thoughts, going back to that scripture at the beginning about the foundation, the rain's going to come, the trouble is going to come. But if we can learn to, she didn't know that her thoughts affected her feelings and her actions. And once she realized, okay, that thought popped into my head, no, I refuse to believe it. I'm instead going to claim this scripture, what God says about me. Now she's able to do that kind of more automatically, where at first it was just like, like there was no way to really rein that in. And so we can learn the tools to overcome, because the trouble is going to come, but we can learn the tools where we can face it head on and not be afraid and know who God says we are.
Well, and what I love about this is Fearless has an entire impact curriculum called Freedom Thoughts. And we teach adults how to do this very same thing that we're talking about right now. And I remember this beautiful time with my middle son where he was really struggling with his faith, but it all came back to his thought life. And, the devil was just planting things like God's not real. God can't really help you. This is all a fake, phony thing. And sometimes in the public school district, they teach things that are contradictory to what the Bible teaches. And just that perfect storm of all of that coming together was really ravaging his thought life. So it was like, we popped open the Bible, we sat down and we're like, what are your top thoughts that you're dealing with? And he was able to recognize that that wasn't the voice of God.
Yeah.
And so I think if we can teach our children what is the voice of God, what is our own thoughts, and that is going to be so important that we can teach this young for them. Something that you say in the book, it's one of they call them like sticky statements, things that just like really stand out. But you say, note, I didn't say perfect parenting. I said purposeful parenting. And it's kind of like what we're just walking through, like, how do we get over this fear of ruining our children? And part of it is realizing that we're not going to do it perfect, that but we can do it purposeful. So what's the difference, do you think, between purposeful parenting and perfect parenting.
Yeah, I mean, perfect parenting is just unrealistic, and you're going to stress yourself out. You're going to get more anxiety and fear if you try to get it perfectly, because you're just not. But thankfully, God's grace is sufficient, and His power is made perfect in our weakness.
That's right.
And I think we can, if we remember that like, I have God on my side, and so He's going to guide me, and I'm going to ask Him to make my path straight and to show me, when our kids face difficulty, like, okay, God, what do we do? Here's another example. My son went to a basketball camp last summer, and this was his first camp, really, like all day camp. He didn't sleep over, but he went. And there were like 250 kids, and it was overwhelming. And so after the first day, he's like, yeah, I don't really want to go back. And he even got like a little teary, and we prayed. We went to God and we're like, God, show us what to do, because I don't know what to do. And my first instinct is to protect. And so I'm like, okay, don't go. But then I'm like, wait, but what is that teaching him if I don't push him to go? And so my husband and I prayed and asked God, and we're like, you're going to go. And we equipped him with some verses and like prayed with him. And he told me that day at lunch, he's like, God, help me to be okay. And I was like, oh my gosh, a
Oh,
7-year-old boy praying that, like, how sweet is that? And he was okay. And then by the end of the camp on Friday, we're sitting there, they're giving out awards. The last award was the MVP. And so they're explaining what it is. And I'm like, he's going to get this. And he won, Christy, out of all these kids. And I don't say that to brag that he won, but I was like, dude, look at if you would have given up, you
right.
never would have seen that you would have been okay. And that was a time of, like, truthfully, the next day at camp, I was at home worried, praying, like, is he going to be okay? Like, is he like scared or alone? And I feel like I'm glad that I trusted God to give me the wisdom. I leaned on Him. We don't need to make all these decisions ourselves. Like, thankfully, we have a community, hopefully, around us, our husbands, moms, dads that we know around that we trust and who have the same value system. Like, we can ask, and we don't need to put the pressure on us to make the perfect decision, but like, put the pressure on God. Like, God, show me. I'm coming to you. Show me what to do. And also, I think being present is part of being purposeful. So it's like, if we make a mistake, like when I've yelled at my kids, I've apologized. And that's a chance to model grace and to model, hey, I'm going to ask God for forgiveness, and to model that, like, we sin too. And so it's not a wasted opportunity. Sure, like, yelling at your kids is not great. I'm not going to recommend that. But we can use these things that we think are mistakes and that we're ruining our kids to show our kids, like, hey, I'm imperfect, but I'm going to go to God and I'm going to let Him transform my weakness. And we can be that model to them, because at some point they're going to have to do that too. They're going to have to recognize that, like, we all have, like, we're flawed human beings. All of us have fallen short. And so modeling to that is a great thing. And so that is another way to, like, take the pressure off of, like, I don't need to make the perfect decision, because God can redeem anything and His grace is always available. He can lead me, He can guide me. And if I mess up, that can be a learning experience for me and my kids.
Something that I love that you just kind of pulled out there was, how much can we empower our children at a young age to seek God for themselves? I think sometimes we hover, or we think that we have to make all the calls, but man, Jesus lifted up children. I mean, He had some serious rebukes about people that did not treat children right, and so I feel like if we can teach our children young, I mean, kindergarten, like, hey, baby, you can hear from Jesus as well. You can hear from God, like, and so you did that. You guys prayed on behalf of your son, but he prayed as well. So how beautiful is that? So teaching our children to seek the Lord, I think, is really, really important as well. Okay, so this part might be my favorite part of the book because it's so true and so powerful. Recently, I did a reel where I said, parents, the best gift you can give to your children is a healthy you. And that will bring more peace. And you say, to raise emotionally healthy children, we mamas need to focus on our emotional health first. So how often do you think us neglecting our own personal health, emotional health is affecting our parenting?
Oh, I mean, all the time. I feel like when I was really looking at, like, how can I help my kids work through some of this, I realized I'm like the first offense, like, if I'm unhealthy, it trickles down. They
That's right.
feed off of my anxiety. I feed off of their anxiety sometimes. It's this vicious cycle. And so if we want them to be healthy, we have to be healthy too. And I
Mm,
think so often as moms, we have a million things on our plate where we put ourselves last. And I'm not saying like, oh, take a bubble bath, but I think we really need to inspect where we are with God. Are we getting that alone time? Are we getting rest? Are we breathing? It says like, be still and know. When was the last time we just were still? And I've been trying to, like, I say this in my book too, savor the moment. Like, and what does that look like? Intentionally enjoying the shower instead of rushing through and thinking, I need to go do this and then that. And it's just like, no, I'm going to sit here and enjoy this hot water on my back for a minute. And I'm going to slow down. I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm just going to enjoy this moment. And I feel like we don't allow ourselves that, and we're rushing around. And I know when I'm frantically like trying to get my kids out of the door, it heightens them. It makes them feel like, oh, mom is rushing, and this is so funny too. I took a picture to maybe share on Instagram. I don't know if I will, but the other night my daughter was jumping on my bed. I didn't want her to, my 4-year-old did it, broke a hanger, a wooden hanger, like split. And I took a picture of the hanger because I didn't lose my cool. And normally in the past, maybe I'd be like, what are you like? What? We're trying to go to bed. You're jumping on the bed. And my son was like, are you okay? Like, are you feeling stressed out right now? Like, aren't you a little overwhelmed? Because that's my normal response. Like, mommy's just overwhelmed right now. That's why I'm yelling. And I was like, no, like I can actually be like, obviously I don't want you breaking hangers, but I was able to have that peace and like, yes, please don't do that, but not lose it. And so I
mm,
think, do we have that? Do we, if we're constantly losing our temper, there's so many posts and reels and podcasts about not yelling at your kids. It's like, that's a sign to us that maybe something like too much is happening and our own mental sanity isn't there, because a
mm,
lot of times when we feel overwhelmed, it's just going to come out of our mouths.
mm.
And so, yes, of course, that's going to affect our kids. And if whole parents raise whole kids, like we can't expect our kids to be able to express their feelings well and to not lose their cool if we're not doing that too. Like, how are they ever going to learn that if we're their first model, and if we aren't taking care of ourselves, if we aren't showing them how to have balance with technology or how to rest our bodies and rest our brains? Like, how are they going to do that?
Hey friends, I want to tell you about Podcast Plus. For just $5 a month, you can subscribe to bonus content that no one else will receive. So if you love our Fearless Talks, you're going to love Podcast Plus. Head over to fearlessunite.com/podcast or just click the link in show notes. This situation that just happened with my oldest son, he's learning to drive, is coming to my mind. So I'm just going to share it. He made a few questionable calls on the driving situation, and I was very passionately raising my voice about, because like, I don't know, you could die, right?
Yeah.
If you don't do this right. And he started to be very defensive and not really taking accountability and all this stuff. And it really like bothered me, because I'm like, man, this boy normally like takes accountability. He says he's sorry. So he kind of said some things that like in the moment hurt my feelings. And generally I would have like, blah, I would have like said back, but I stopped for a moment. I was just like, wait a minute, let me really think about this. And his friend was in the car. And so I think he was embarrassed, because I was correcting him in front of his friend. And so I'm just trying to process this, trying to be a good mom in this situation. So his friend gets out of the car and, I say to him, hey, buddy, I want you to know that if I would have stepped out of bounds or I was, unkind to you in that situation, I have in the past taken accountability for my words when I'm wrong. I don't feel like I'm wrong in this situation. I feel like I was directing you and taking charge in a very serious situation. And it was so cool because he was able to reflect, like, you're right. Like, you have apologized to me before when you have not been cool, because there's been plenty of times where I've done that. And he was able to see like, you're right. And then he just gives me chills. He was like, Mom, I'm sorry. I'll do better next time. And so I think it's just those moments that like, if we'll take accountability ourselves, if we'll be healthy ourselves, if we won't be prideful ourselves. And I mess this up all the time, but I think they pay attention to when you say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They pay attention to when you're accountable. Like when you said your children said back to you, "Are you overwhelmed?" Like they're listening. They know when we're doing things right, when we're doing things wrong. They're more discerning than we give them credit for. Don't you agree?
Oh, for sure. And I think our actions, like our words matter. Obviously, life and death is in the power of the tongue, but I think our actions really matter too, And I think even you just showing and giving him that opportunity to reflect is huge. There's so much of that in my
Mm.
book because I think often in the middle of a situation, we just may not have the mental capacity to really fully inspect what's happening, but you kind of paused and thought about like, what's all the different aspects of the scenario, what are the factors, like what's really going on here. And I think even for him to reflect on that of like what's really going on here, like why did I lose my cool on my mom? Was it because my friend was in the car? And that's like a valid kind of excuse,
Yeah.
like that's a thing, right? We get embarrassed in front of people. And so, but taking accountability for his actions, like what a gift that you were able to walk him through that. And I think it was easier because you had done it before and it was modeled to him. And so he knew how to do it, because he saw that in your actions before that, like, wow, yes, mom does reflect and kind of go back over the situation. And maybe I should do that too.
But listen, saying you're sorry to your children is not easy. Like
Yeah.
you want to just be like, "Mommy had a bad day and you're annoying me." And that's it. But like that's not okay. Do you want your children to act like that to somebody else? So just modeling that, I think is really important. So let's talk about helping their children identify their feelings. You kind of talked on that, just kind of looking over my situation with my son. But you have the cognitive triangle. And this is the science part that I kind of geeked out on. Will you walk us through that and explain that? Because it's really powerful.
Of course, yeah. So this is in chapter 3. And I feel like for people listening, it's hard. I'm a visual person. And so I'm like, I want to look at it. But it basically on each tip of the triangle, it's our feelings, our thoughts, and our actions. And you're so right. Kids often, when I did this with my students in the school system, if a situation happened, I'm like, let's look through this. Like, let's see what just happened. You just exploded at your friend and yelled at them. Let's see what happened. Obviously, that's the action, yelling, exploding. And often they're like, yeah, well, they called me this name or they took my seat. And so they're blaming the other kids for their actions. And it's like,
Okay.
whoa, let's see how this is all connected. Like, what were you feeling? I was feeling disrespected. I was feeling embarrassed. Like, let's identify and really sit in those feelings. So sometimes there may be two feelings happening at the same time and they don't realize it. Like I know I've had kids who are like, whoa, I feel scared and excited at the same time. Like, how is that
Mm.
possible? And it's like, you can feel multiple feelings at the same time. And so processing that and also understanding our body gives us cues and really especially young kids don't realize this, that like a tightness in your chest may mean that you're feeling nervous, or like if your fists are feeling balled and your body is feeling tight, that could be anger. And so helping them understand like your body is giving you cues, telling you like what you're feeling right now, and pausing to listen to that. And then in that situation, going back to the thoughts, that's probably the hardest thing for kids to understand, and sometimes adults, because it's easy to identify the actions. It's a little harder to do the feelings, but with working through it, you can. But then the thoughts, like before you yelled at that kid who took your seat, there was a thought in your head.
Mm.
And so getting them to realize that now, of course, say whatever they want, but we can reframe that and say, like, I was thinking in my head, how dare you? Like, you took my seat and you're always rude to me. And like, you never care for my feelings. What if we thought, "Oh, I'm so annoyed that they took my seat, but I wonder if I just say, hey, I was sitting there first. Can you please move?" Like, that
Mm.
is going to be a completely different reaction from your friend than if you're like, dude, you took my seat, like, move. They're not going to respond well. And so if they can see that, like, yes, this is frustrating. I'm allowed to feel frustrated. Like, we shouldn't be afraid of negative feelings. We're allowed to feel frustrated or disappointed or embarrassed. That's okay to feel that way. But how we respond is going to change how others respond to us. And so to really change our actions, we need to get a hold of our thoughts, because that's what's driving that whole system in our body. That's what's making our heartbeat fast or our fist balling up, is what our brain is thinking. And that, again, is the hardest part. But with time and practice, we can really learn to understand what we're thinking and how that affects the situation and how that affects the words coming out of our mouth.
The triangle is so important. For some reason, my youngest, she's my only daughter. I have a really hard time figuring out her emotions. And I don't know if it's just the female side. Normally with my boys, I'm like, he's angry right now. Oh boy, he's feeling a little stressed out right now. But with her, it's like masked at all these different things. It kind of falls under perfectionism. It falls under like when you hold her accountable, she kind of makes excuses and blames, kind of like what you said in those. But like I can't get to the root a lot of times of what's going on, like what's really happening. And I know I'm reading some other parents' mail where they're like, when my child acts like this, I have no idea what is really going on here. And I think it takes a little bit of investigation and prayer and presence, like you noticed, or like you talked about, like to sit with your child when you're exhausted. And I don't know what it is, but it's often like when you're at bedtime and you're so tired and you just want them to go to bed, all of a sudden they're like,
Yeah.
and they like tell you everything. And you're like, I'm so tired right now and I need some extra time to sit with them. But on page 70, you talk about ways to help your kids if they're experiencing fear. And guys, something that's really cool about this book is there's like these gray boxes throughout them, and she calls them brain builders. And they're these little nuggets of wisdom that you're just like, what? This was so good. So anyway, on 70, you talk about ways you can walk kids through that are experiencing fear. So help us understand like recognizing fear in people, and then what do we do in those moments when our children are feeling that way?
Yeah. So, okay, truthfully, I forget what is on page 70, but I think just answering this off the top of my head, a lot of kids who have fear or anxiety are going to say, my belly hurts. They don't know. They're not going to say, I'm feeling fearful. They don't know to say that yet. They may say,
Yeah.
my belly hurts, or I have a headache, or they may want to just be alone. Sometimes that, there's different ways that kids respond. And so like, I wish I could say, if this happens, then this is the answer. We do need to investigate. We do need to pray. We do need to ask God, like, what's really going on here, and start to investigate and see, like, okay, your belly hurts every time we're about to go to church. Like, is there something going on at church that's making you feel uncomfortable? Or you have a headache every time we're about to go to soccer practice. Like, are you worried that you're not going to do well? Or is there someone on the team that's bothering you? Start to look at patterns and start to see when they're saying they're going to say the physical symptoms first. A lot of times, my head hurts, my belly hurts, I don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can start to investigate, like, what's the real problem here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And honestly, for my daughter, we were reading a book together, and it talked about, and I had told her this, but then when she read it in a book, it became like, oh, this is true, even though mommy had told her this before. But a lot of times when you're nervous, your belly can hurt. And she's like, I didn't know that. Like, I thought, so her fear was, if my belly hurts, I'm going to throw up. And she was afraid of throwing up, and she didn't want to like throw up at school or, at church, whatever. And it was like, no, your belly can hurt for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes you do have the stomach bug, but a lot of times that's not why your stomach hurts.
Mm.
And so when she realized that when I worry, my stomach can hurt, it was kind of like something just like clicked. And she realized that, like, that's a sign. Now if my belly hurts, like, okay, going through, like, did I eat something weird? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sick. Maybe I'm worried. Like, what am I thinking about? And then it kind of could go to that thoughts, like, what's running through my head right now? What am I contemplating? What am I thinking about in my head? And so I think that was what it said, maybe on page 70, but that is one way. And then, truthfully, we need to get to the bottom of it. We need to know what's really going on. But if we're in the moment and they need to get their brain just kind of like off that negative thought, and they can't, because a lot of times, the more you think about that negative thought, the more it's going to loop. And the more you're like, oh,
Yep.
just don't think that, the more you think it. And so we've done cognitive distraction. So reading a book, if my daughter or son has to read out loud, they have to concentrate on the words, and their thoughts are interrupted. They can't read out loud and worry at the same time. Also playing games, like an ABC game, looking around the room. What starts with an A? What starts with a B? If there's not much in the room, you could do like fruits or vegetables. Name all the fruits that start with the letter A. It's getting their mind off that worry and getting them out of fight or flight, because sometimes we can't talk ourselves out of it. We literally need to distract our brains so that our bodies can calm down. And I think this is true. It takes about 20 minutes for that fight or flight. If that's activated and our cortisol is rising and we're anxious, it takes about 20 minutes to get out of that. And so it's going to take time, even after your brain's kind of calm down, for your body to catch up and for your heart rate to like go to its normal rhythm and all of that. But we can use those distractions in our kids when they're feeling really anxious. My only caveat is if you have to keep doing that with your child, you might want to wonder, like, is there something deeper going on? You know, if you have to do that every day, it's kind of like maybe there's something else in these thoughts that we need to kind of inspect.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And honestly, I feel like I might have missed something with my daughter this morning. She came down and she's like, I'm so tired, Mom. I only got like 2 hours of sleep and I just feel, and she was like, like, and I was just pumping her up, da 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 da. But now I'm thinking like, man, I should have investigated. I should have taken the time to ask her a few more questions, like, because I know when I don't sleep at night, I'm thinking about something. There's something that
Yeah.
I'm not, and so I think as parents, we miss these beautiful opportunities, and I'm the chief one to really investigate and love our children well. And I think we just dismiss the bellyache, we dismiss the bad night of sleep, we dismiss the headache, we dismiss these things because we just think it's normal part of life. But really, we could step into it and do this purposeful parenting, like you're talking about. Lauren, I don't know if you know this, but one of the most impactful things that you have shared with me is just your story of your husband and how your mother-in-law has really poured into him and would not allow him to have a victim mentality and really pumped up who his identity is, and it's in Christ. And you do such a beautiful job of walking your readers through who is your identity? Who are you? You are a child of God. Would you mind sharing that story because about your husband and going on to be a doctor? Because it is one of the coolest stories you've ever shared with me.
Yeah, sure. So my husband, not that this should matter, but to give full context, is African American. And so I just think his story is such a story of hope. And his parents got divorced when he was young. So at different points, they were living with different friends. They moved around a lot. There was some, insecurity in that, just because at a point she was a single mom. And when he was very young, he said he wanted to be a doctor, and no one in his family had ever gone to college. And so, right there's like something stacked against him, right? That statistics would say, like, this is going to be too hard for you.
Mm-hmm.
And really, people have told us, especially around the George Floyd thing, like, aren't you afraid for your son? Life's always going to be harder for your kids because of the color of their skin. And right away, we rejected that because I'm like, that's not what God says. That's not what the Bible says. And I would never tell my kid, life is going to be harder for you. What is that how are they going to respond if you're constantly being told you're always going to have to work harder? Life is stacked against you. Like, that could lead to hopelessness. And that is not, again, from God. And so my mother-in-law was like, okay, God put this desire in your heart to be a doctor. You are going to be a doctor. And just through the years prayed and found opportunities. And he actually got into a program. It's called the Meyerhoff program. And his undergrad was paid for. And just all these things that God did. I don't have time to go through all of them, but all these steps to bring his dream to reality. And she always just told him, like, God has given you a brain. You're smart. You can do this. And just poured into that, like, with God, anything is possible. And I thought, what a beautiful thing, because there are so many kids who are told, well, sorry, like, no one in our family has ever gone to college. You're not gonna be able to do that. And what a blessing that he had a mom who spoke God's word and truth over his life. And I feel like it changed the trajectory of his life.
And now he's a successful doctor.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that is a story. Honestly, my husband is not a speaker or anything, but I feel like it is a story that needs to be told, because it's good to see that, like, the American dream is still alive.
Amen.
And that you can, with God, you can do anything. Like, it doesn't matter what barrier is before you. If God places that desire in your heart and that is part of his will for your life, then he will make the way. He will open doors and he will bring it to life for you.
Oh man, Lauren, it has been such an honor to walk through life with you and to see this book come into the world. Where can our friends, our fearless community, go and find this book?
Yeah, definitely. So it's on Amazon, at Barnes and Noble, like wherever books are sold, you can grab a copy. And definitely, I'm most active on Instagram at inspired.motherhood. And I love to share more about this, tips and tools for helping our kids navigate today's world, because we don't need to live in fear. We can have a plan, and we can face those adversity, difficulty, challenges with a plan and with a purpose, knowing like we can get to the other side and we don't need to let that struggle shake us. So you can go to my website as well, inspired-motherhood.com. And again, I think the best place is probably Amazon, because then you get shipping in 2 days, and it will come to you quickly so you can start reading.
Absolutely. And we're going to do something special too. If you go to christybulwer.com and click the Get Anxiety button, or Get Anxiety Tips, I send out weekly emails on this, and Lauren and I are going to team up, and I'm going to send out a list to all my subscribers, and I'm going to give away a book. I'm actually going to give away a book. So make sure that you're on my subscriber list so that you will get that email, and we will do the little competition on giving away a book. That'll be really fun. Lauren, the way that we try to sustain this podcast is we do Podcast Plus. And what we have is monthly subscribers come in and they get bonus content for like $5 a month. And I was just wondering, would you stick around? And I want to talk to you about our overpacked schedule and parenting. How do we clear some things off? How do we not, go with the world of like being in 42 sports? And how do we like purposefully pick a calendar that is in alignment with God? And how do we get some things off of our calendar? I feel like you've got a lot of wisdom to share on that. Would you mind sticking around and doing that interview?
Oh, I would love to, because I feel like, truthfully, sometimes I've been afraid of that white space in the calendar, and I think, oh, we need to do something. Like we're not, our kids aren't involved. So then I say yes to things, and pretty soon it's like, whoa, what did I do? I said yes to way too many things, and this is not my best yes. And so I would love to talk about that with you.
Great. Well, Fearless family, thank you for listening today. Thank you, Lauren, for having us. And again, if you want to listen to that Podcast Plus, I'm going to have Lauren on, and we're going to talk about how to clear our calendars and have more purposeful planning, parenting in our calendars. Lauren, thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate you so much.
Thanks for having me.
If you found this to be helpful, you can find out so much more in my book, Nervous Breakthrough. And guess what? Right now, you can order it on Amazon. Also, can you do something for me? Will you help us get the word out about this podcast? I would be so honored if you would share it with your loved ones, rate it, review it, and also be sure to subscribe. And lastly, and I really mean this, we want to hear from you. If you have suggestions or ideas on something that I should cover, or a tip that you'd really like help on, please send us an email, podcast@fearlessunite.com. Again, that's podcast@fearlessunite.com. Thank you so much for listening.